The 2015 exam featured one of the most challenging argument analysis articles. And the main reason for this was because we were given two speeches that seemed like they weren't arguing about anything. And in addition to this, it was also a comparative, so there was two articles, which always adds to the fun. So this video is going to walk you through this argument analysis exam and how to annotate and analyze the article. Now, I recommend that you first read this article and try and do the reading time under exam conditions. And it will also help you understand what I'm about to go through much better. So first, I like to look at the background information, which is here. And basically what we're given are two speeches. First from Bennett, so she is the CEO of an organization called Big Splash. And what Big Splash does is basically they reward volunteers for their work. And then the person that got the award, so Matthew Newman, so that is the second speech, and he talks about what he thinks a true volunteer is. So let's have a look at the article now. So zooming out, you can see these are the two articles. Now I'm going to go through each block. I'm going to summarize it first, and then pick out some of the literary techniques or quotes that you can analyze. And obviously I can't pick every single quote, so I'll just go over the ones that I have used in my own essays. So let's start with the first block here. It reads, "Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and volunteers from around the country. It is my great privilege to present the 10th Annual Big Splash Australian Volunteers Award." So basically what the speaker is doing for this entire block is introducing the company or the organization as well as what they do. And so it's an organization that rewards volunteers, as we mentioned. And if we look at how the article begins, you can see that it's quite formal. And this will be important later on when we move on to the second text. And then it seems like there's not a lot of literary techniques or useful literary techniques that we can analyze, but this is where I want to introduce one of the most sophisticated techniques I can use. And this is called connotations, which basically describe are there any hidden meanings behind the words that the article uses. For example, let's focus on these two words, great privilege. So how did these two words make you feel about the award? Well, it definitely makes it seem like it's a big deal. Or in other words, it aggrandizes the award. And so this makes the award seem like it's very honorable and very noble to have. And so by giving this award to volunteers, it elevates their status to be quite high. And that was my basic takeaway for this first block here. And now let's take a look at the visual. So I'll just zoom out a bit. So we can see that there is a banner and we can see one hand reaching and lifting up another hand with the caption, "Giving back to volunteers of Australia." And one way to interpret this is to view one hand as Big Splash, so the organization, and they are lifting up the hands of volunteers. In other words, this is elevating their status and making their efforts recognized by the whole world. And feel free to add in your own interpretations. As long as you support it with evidence, then that is completely fine. So for the next block, the idea here can be summarized through the first sentence. So all too often, the work of volunteers is undervalued and under-recognized. And basically the rest of this chunk is supporting this fact with some more evidence and statistics. So he talks about how the total number of volunteering hours is the same as billions of dollars of voluntary work. So Bennett is basically equating the responsibility of volunteers with billions of dollars. And what this works to achieve is first, this appeals to a specific subset of readers. And so these audiences would be those who would have an awareness of the workings of a national economy. And this helps them realize not just the importance, but also the value of the kindness of strangers. And so this is a very interesting technique that we have here. Basically what Bennett is doing is turning something invisible, such as kindness, into something more tangible and more visible, such as billions of dollars. And here I want to mention that traditional techniques such as rhetorical questions, alliteration, they're all good to use, but try not to be limited by these traditional techniques. In fact, a lot of persuasive language don't have a name to them. They are just persuasive in nature. So if you do come across a sentence or a structure or a strategy that seems persuasive to you, as long as you can explain that clearly, then feel free to include it. So for example, what I have here is that the author is making something invisible, more tangible and more visible. And another way you could say this is perhaps the author draws a link between the kindness of strangers and billions of dollars. So that is another way to go about it. So there might be a name for this, but remember we're not being marked for identifying literary techniques. Our main purpose with this task is to analyze the language and say why it's persuasive. So as long as you explain your stance quite clearly, then you can already stand out. Alright, moving on to the next block here. Now, this is very similar to what we had before because it's talking about how volunteers are extremely valuable to society. And if we just look at the first sentence, volunteers and their organizations are heroic. So again, if we look at literary techniques to help us stand out, connotations are always going to be your best friend since they allow you to closely analyze even the power of individual words. So for example here, the word heroic. When you describe something as a hero or a person as a hero, what is the hidden meaning behind that? Well, in this case, there's grand connotations of benevolence and nobility imbued in this term, heroic. And what this does is it encourages us audiences to realize that volunteers are brave heroes who are risking their lives in the face of disaster and calamity. And so this might incite feelings of admiration or respect for these people. So that is one important thing to note. And the other thing is how this argument is structured. For example, the author for the past block, so up here, and also for the majority of this block, talks about why volunteers are so great. So these positive descriptions of volunteers, the work they do, the sacrifices they have done, is juxtaposed against the more negative reality that we have often overlooked this enormous workforce as we go about our daily lives. And what this contrast or juxtaposition does is it's basically a guilt trip. Now, you obviously don't want to write that, but we can write, this makes her readers feel guilty and even ashamed for their ignorance towards these volunteer heroes. And as a result, audiences are more likely to support Big Splash's initiatives for addressing this lack of acknowledgement. So the technique that Bennett is using here is she is stirring up emotions such as shame and guilt and converting that emotion into a desire to take action. And the action in this case is to acknowledge volunteers. So moving on to this block here, the most striking thing in my opinion is the repetition of inclusive language. So we take it for granted, enriches us all. So there's a lot of repetition of inclusive language. And what this does is it imparts a sense of solidarity and also unity within the audience. And this works to empower all audience members, so not just some audiences, but every single audience, into realizing that they are part of one society and therefore they should not forget about these volunteers. So it's this call to action and rallying of support. And if we just move to the end of this article, you can see that the call to action is quite clear. So it says, we should never forget or overlook them. So that is the call to action, or what the author, or speaker in this case, wants the audiences to do after this speech. So you can see that the author initially proposes a problem to us, which is that volunteers are being undervalued or under-recognized. And now the author, or speaker, provides us with a solution. That is basically the article, and then the rest of this is just the rest of the ceremony. Alright, now for the second piece that we have here. So this is by Matthew Newman, and he is the spokesperson for Tradespeople Without Borders, which is the recipient of this award. And you can see that the way he begins his speech is completely different to how Bennett does it. So thanks heaps, cheers everyone. So you can see that it's very casual as opposed to the more rigid and more formal way that Bennett begins hers. So distinguished guest and all of that. And what this does is it creates a sense of casual humility. And this might increase the rapport or the relationship between him and the audiences. So it's more likely that the audiences are going to trust what he says when he talks about the role of volunteers. So basically the rest of this chunk is just him accepting the award. And then for the next part, he talks about the backstory for his volunteering organization. And I just want to move on to the third chunk here. And for this entire section, he is sort of critiquing Bennett for talking about how volunteers are being undervalued by saying that he hasn't found this the case. And just note, even though this is a critique, it's in a very conciliatory tone. So that is a good word to use here. And what this critique seeks to achieve is it's trying to say that volunteering shouldn't be for a reward. Instead, it's just what a decent human being should do. So to summarize, Bennett talks more about the economics about volunteering, so the billions of dollars of volunteering work, whereas Newman here talks more about the morality and the decency that goes with volunteering. And basically, in terms of argument type, Bennett uses more rational and economic argument, whereas Newman here uses a more moral and ethical argument. So that is another point that you can compare and contrast. And now just to quickly touch on the image. So this is similar to Bennett's use of inclusive language, because what she tries to achieve through that is a sense of unity amongst her audiences. And it's the same case here, although the delivery is a bit different. Rather than inclusive language, we have a more inclusive visual. So the image depicts several people stacking their hands together, and this encourages all audiences to be this together and take up the basic societal responsibility of volunteering, not for monetary rewards as he argues, but rather to help Australia's reputation as a caring country. So that is the article, and now looking at the whole piece now, I have color-coded the 3 areas that I have compared and contrasted. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to follow these guidelines, but it's just a personal recommendation. So basically what I did was I compared the green section of the first text with the green section of the second speech, and same with red and blue with blue. And as a bonus tip for watching to the end, here is what you can talk about for each color. So that is the video. I hope that was helpful, because this was definitely one of the most challenging exams for me. And if you do have any questions, just let me know down below, and I'll see you all next time. Take care.